Hello and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today we'll be talking about Disney's decline into uh, worship of Moloch.
Wokedom.
What?
Wokedom.
Wokedom. Alright. I just prefer to call it, devil worship. Satanism, as I like to say. But how are you guys doing today?
Not bad. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you. I'm here today with Anthony Marquetta, David Breitenbach, and Carolyn Furlong again, and we'll be continuing where we left off, touching on the modern era with Princess and the Frog, and moving forward into much more relevant topics. Take us away.
Yeah, so the main difference between this time and last time, from my perspective, is that I finished your book, David.
Okay.
It was quite good.
Well, thank you.
I enjoyed it thoroughly. Uh, so Ben, we'll go in Ben's order because there is some stuff that I want to bring up that I noticed in the book that I thought was definitely worthy of talking about, and it will connect. But let's do things in God's own order, right? So Ben mentioned Princess and the Frog first. I think that is worth talking about. Princess and the Frog is an unusual little movie. I think it is very flawed, but I think it has probably more good than bad in it. In particular, two things about Princess and the Frog have always stood out to me as being particularly excellent. Uh, One of them is Dr. Facilier, and Facilier's song is incredible. S tier, one of my favorites. And also just an all-time great villain with an all-time great villain death. And
Right.
and the second thing about the movie that always stood out to me that makes it just slightly more than a one-hit wonder, oh, it has that one thing you like,
Mhm.
which is sort of what Emperor's New Groove is, right? Like Emperor's New Groove is a very fun movie, but I basically only like it because of Kronk and Yzma. Uh, Princess and the Frog is, I think, a little bit more than that. I actually really like the song Almost There and the change in animation style that they do for that song. Uh, but otherwise, I don't think that there's all that much more to recommend it. Anybody else have thoughts on the film?
I don't know. I think I've got a higher opinion of it than you do. It's been a little while since I've seen it, but I remember enjoying it. I remember liking. I thought I liked the dynamic between the two leads um, a fair amount. Like the fact that they kind of each, like we said, with Beauty and the Beast, they each have something to learn from each other. It's not just a one-sided relationship. Uh, she has to kind of learn a bit to loosen up a bit. He has to learn to be more responsible to kind of meet halfway. Um, I thought, like you said, the villain's great. Um, I liked the dynamic with her friend, the kind of ditzy
Yeah,
princess, because
that's something worth talking about more in a moment, but keep
yeah,
going.
just because she's she's this ditzy, spoiled girl, but she's also really sweet and really, very friendly, very, kind to the heroine. But
So,
when
here's
they,
something I agree with you, but here's something that occurred to me thinking about this when I was looking at your analysis of Song of the South.
mhm,
And you mentioned very specifically that you thought that the issue with Song of the South in modern terms, like not what the actual issue is, but what moderns see the issue as, is
mhm,
that they don't talk about race. And
yeah,
your explanation of that is it seems like we should be acknowledging somehow that Remus is, in a worse state than the white families, and we don't. Now, I agree with you that this is not actually a flaw. It wasn't the sort of movie he's telling, and
mhm,
nobody is obligated to tell a certain type of story. But what does occur to me is watching Princess and the Frog, and I've always said this about the film, it's always struck me about it. You could level that exact same criticism at Princess and the Frog, except much worse because it was made nowadays.
Yeah, it's people do level that same criticism at it. Um,
They do, but nobody's trying to cancel Princess and the Frog. And yet, it's actually, I think, actually a lot worse from that perspective. Again, I reject the paradigm completely. You are not obligated to tell a certain type of
mhm.
story. If that's not the story you're telling, there's no reason that you need to force it in. But if you're working from that paradigm, Princess and the Frog has no excuse.
Yeah, it doesn't have. Yeah, um, yeah. If you're going to make that argument, and then Princess and the Frog is definitely kind of more guilty of it than Song of the South. Song of the South is, of course, like I said, told from a child's perspective, and Princess and the Frog is told from more young adult perspective. Um, I mean, it's not something that bothers me personally. Just, uh,
So, I will say this about Princess and the Frog. I do think that there's some merit to a criticism on those grounds, at least a little bit, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I think there is a problem that in a story that's set in, like, what? Is it supposed to be the 60s?
no, it's like supposed to be in the
40s?
20s.
20s? Oh, yeah, wow. I'm blank. I
Her
blanked on
dad
the movie. I
died in
haven't
World
seen
War
it in a
One.
bit. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie in a bit, so I blanked on the time period for a moment there. Yeah, whatever. So, but in that time period, right? For a film set in that time period, it's a little bit strange that you could race swap the characters and effectively the story would not be affected at all. Especially considering what Tiana's goal is, which is to start a restaurant. The closest you get is an extremely subtle hint that the reason they turned down her
Yeah.
restaurant loan is related to race. But even that seems to be more connected to the fact that she's poor than her race.
Mhm.
If you had race swapped the characters, there would basically be no change to the story, and I do think that that is kind of conspicuous considering what's happening. In Song of the South, Remus being black quite literally did not affect the story. It wasn't about that. But in Princess and the Frog, it's not about that explicitly, but it should be affecting her in some way. And the fact that she has a relationship with a rich white friend, like, nobody comments on this when it would have been incredibly unusual at the time.
Well, it's different in different places. Like in the north and in like places like St. Louis, yeah, it'd be a little unusual. Except it's clear that her mother is the guy's cook, and might even a bit, helped raise him, and certainly raised his daughter, which is a relationship that happened quite a bit. Um, like
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mr. Blandings builds his dream house. Uh, Basically, uh, they had a mammy, as they're called, uh, in their house cooking for them and stuff like that as a hired servant, and she even becomes the face of the advertising campaign they're trying to do. Like like people like to say it was black and white. It's like it wasn't black and white. There's actually a lot more, not race mixing, but there's a lot more mixing going on among them. Like even for like out and out dejected slaves, like they could be removed from a master who mistreated them. Like there was quite a bit more latitude, friendship, and whatnot, there. But they were they had social castes that everyone kept to, and many of them aligned with their race.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there was also a very strong African American business community that was expanding. And there's a whole bunch of conspiracy theories that I dare not mention who the source of and who was threatened by uh, the African American business renaissance or whatever they're calling it. But they took steps to destroy it. And but the Princess and the Frog, Tiana, is in that period where there was starting to be a very big flourishing of African American business and community that could have created its own thing at the time. So
Yeah,
yeah, being denied for a small business loan all the time. There's probably somebody behind her not getting a small business loan. But I think if we're being ultra realistic, the guy, I can't remember the white guy's name, but he probably would have done it for her if he believed in her as much as he did.
I'm happy to accept that. Like, I'm not here to bury Princess and the Frog, so I'm happy to accept that answer. I just think it's very funny that people criticize Song of the South on those grounds when this is why I always mention this with Princess and the Frog. Like, when are we getting our race swapped Princess and the Frog? Since the story literally would not change if the races were switched. So let's do it.
That's true. Actually, true. Yeah, I mean, I kind of race issues kind of are not my thing, so I kind of it doesn't really hit me very much. Um, it's like, yeah, I see what you're saying, and it is a bit more conspicuous here. Um, this kind of doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the film too much, subjectively speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My bigger problem, this is my actual critique. Like, I would say my more objective critique, shall we say, that's not based on modern cultural mores that I do not even share, of Princess and the Frog, is that actually pay attention to the story one day and you'll realize that Tiana actually does and accomplishes very little in the movie. Which is kind of ironic because her entire character is based around like hard work to get what you need. And she just kind of she's pushed along events like a lot more than you would expect for this sort of story and this sort of character. It's a little bit odd.
Yeah, she doesn't really like her goal isn't really related to the main kind of problem of the film. It's sort of like she accidentally becomes a frog and then just kind of drifts along. They have the romance and then it kind of works itself out. I mean, she does kind of fight Facilier a bit at the end and defy him. So that's something. But other than that, yeah, she doesn't really do a whole lot. It's kind of more about the relationship than it is about them actually kind of triumphing in any way.
And I do, like I said, I absolutely love Facilier. So the scene where when Facilier is dragged into the underworld is just an incredible scene.
Yeah.
And it's so good, as I've told people. The line right before that scene is terrible. Like, Tiana says something like, "That's not slime, that's mucus," and it's supposed to be a callback, and I cringe every time I hear it. But then right after that scene, all of the dark creatures like come to life and start singing "Are You Ready?" and drag him into the underworld, and I'm like, okay, I'm back on board.
Yeah. So it is, that's kind of like one of the more like serious and almost like real world depictions of magic that's been in Disney films. Take the consequences of him messing around with the dark spirits and
this is my second
the classic sorcerer's consequence of, oh well, you made a deal and now you get to pay up.
Yes,
yeah,
and
I was gonna say actually, I think the only movie that the only movie I can think of that kind of comes close would be Sleeping Beauty with Maleficent when she turns into the dragon, and he kills her. It's mostly told from his perspective, but at the same time, you kind of get the impression of what happens to her when she goes tumbling off the cliff, and then you focus down and you see the sword in this black spot, and then the sword goes dark.
Yeah. This leads to my second, though much more minor criticism. But I do think, I've thought of this a little bit, and I think on reflection, it's a fair criticism. Mama Odie, who is the voodoo person who they go to for help, she should have been a devout Christian.
Yes.
Like, I know the reason that they didn't do that was... almost certainly the reason they didn't do that was woke reasons. Like, they wanted to portray an example of good voodoo for the bad voodoo, which is bad storytelling. She should have been a devout Christian. That would have made more sense.
Yeah, in New Orleans, definitely. It kind of comes back to this, like, people, like, storytellers are very, unless they're specifically Christian storytellers, they're very uncomfortable with actually taking Christianity seriously these days, and have been for a while, really.
See, that's the thing. If Princess and the Frog were made by Walt Disney, I'm convinced that she would have been explicitly Christian.
Yeah, probably. She would have been like a old Cajun woman or something.
Yep. Yep, exactly.
My kind of main criticism with Princess and the Frog, apart from kind of some of the stuff you mentioned, is just that I didn't find the sidekicks to be very. They felt kind of forced.
No, they were terrible. The
Yeah,
sidekicks.
yeah, yeah.
The Firefly was terrible.
Yeah, the gator felt very forced. Like I say, it's like it feels very much like they were trying to imitate the classic, Renaissance films and the classic Disney films and so forth, to the point where they were just kind of putting them in because they felt they had to have them in there, not because they actually needed them for the story.
Yeah, I would say. Go ahead, Caroline.
Sorry?
You were going to say something?
Uh, I was actually going to say, bring up that Mama Odie would have been Christian in an older Disney movie, because if you go back to movies like The Emperor's New Groove and read up on the original plot, it was supposed to focus on Incan belief, but the eventual product was entirely different. It was originally called Kingdom of the Sun, and it was supposed to have a Prince and the Pauper style adventure, where Cusco switches places with a
Peasant.
peasant who looks exactly like him, and she's doing it because she wants to. Hang on, I'm looking at it. Yeah, that's it. She wants to summon the evil god Supai and capture the sun. The sun gives her wrinkles, so she surmises that living in a world of darkness would prevent her from wrinkling. Uh, it You read about it, and I gotta say I'm much happier with what they went with in the end. But this is interesting because they didn't, in the finished product, of the Incan beliefs in your face. They didn't necessarily remove them either, but they didn't put them in your face or anything like that. And that actually brings me back to Mulan. I was doing some research on it. The co-director of the film, I'll find his name in a minute. Tony Bancroft, that was it. He was the animator on the Gargoyles for The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He came in as the co-director for this. The wiki file, as a Christian, he declined to explore Buddhism within the film. So, and that was something too that, on reflection with Mulan, always struck me as very, very interesting in hindsight, because they didn't go into the ancestor worship explicitly. They didn't go into Buddhism. They didn't go into Confucianism. They gave you the aesthetic and the culture. But they did not do what a number of other shows at the time, and definitely nowadays, do, which is kind of shove, oh, this religion is better than Christianity in your face.
Well, I mean, they do kind of touch on the ancestor worship. That's kind of a fairly major part of the film. But they don't, kind of like push it like they do like other films that do some things. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if we should discuss Mulan, because I probably disagree with all of you about Mulan, and I know I disagree, who I've mentioned a few times because I read him regularly, and he's talked about the stuff I disagree with John C. Wright. I have very, very mixed feelings about Mulan. I think it is a good movie, but I think it is feminist propaganda. I have seen people, John being one of them, try to make the case that's actually incredibly conservative, and I think that that is an incredibly forced interpretation. I don't think that Mulan is conservative at all. I think that it is actually extremely feminist. It is just well written feminism, but well written propaganda for the enemy is still propaganda for the enemy, and that's what I think Mulan is trying to do. The whole point of the story is that Mulan doesn't fit as a housewife, but she does work, even using her feminine wiles as a soldier, looking at things from an intellectual perspective like men can't do. and the men need to be less masculine and act more feminine, which is symbolized by them dressing in drag at the end of the movie. Now, you could twist this in various ways to try and get a conservative interpretation, and in a sense, the reason that you can is because Milan is good. So, to make it believable, they have to add some aspects of that in. But I think by forcing a conservative interpretation on Mulan, you are missing the intent of the movie.
Have
I'm
you ever
gonna,
read the original or variations on the original ballad?
Yes.
There are some differences between that and the movie. Like in the original, apparently he has a younger brother. I didn't see the version with that. I don't think it was one, and I wish I'd picked it up. It was read it off the shelf and then I put it back. But she had a younger brother who was too young to go to war. Her sister was older than her, I think, and of course, even in the original, her father was too old, and that's why she went to war, was to spare him. So it's interesting. I was looking up Mulan. The original plan, the story was conceived as a Tootsie-like romance. So now Tootsie, for those who don't know in the audience, is a 1982 American satirical romantic comedy. Um, it's directed by Sidney Pollack and stars Dustin Hoffman. Have you seen that one?
oh yeah, I've seen it. He
I
needs he's an out of work actor, so he dresses up as a woman to get on this soap opera show, and kind of ends up becoming a feminist icon in the meantime because he gets annoyed with the way the actresses are treated. Um, anyway, go on.
So the original plan was that she would be a misfit tomboy who loves her father and is betrothed to Shang, whom she has not met. On her betrothal day, her father, Fa Zhu, carves her destiny on a stone tablet in the family temple, which she shatters in anger, running away to forge her own destiny. Now, I'm trying to figure. I'm reading these overs again. I'm trying to find the part. Yeah, it was the acting. It was the head of stories, Chris Sanders, with the romantic comedy aspect. So he urged producer Pam Coates to be more faithful to the original legend by having Mulan leave home because the filmmakers to change Mulan's character in order to make her more appealing and selfless. Now, another part. So that's that particular part. The other thing is, oh, shoot, I have to go back and forward, back and forward. Yeah, Barry Cook, who served as special effects animator. Let's see. He was offered the chance to work on Mulan, and yeah, he cited as influences Charlie Chaplin and David Lean during production. So this is where a lot of the comedy, I think, kind of comes through. They did stick very close as they could to the in many ways. The Mushu was actually added. This is very interesting. Mushu was added at Roy E. Disney's suggestion. Sorry, a little slurry there. And it was Creaky, actually, the cricket, was no one wanted him on the project except for his animator Barry Temple, Michael Eisner, and Joe Grant. The directors didn't want him, the writers didn't want him, and they kept saying, "Well, where's the cricket during all this?" So that's interesting to me. I would never have guessed that Creaky was undesired during the filming.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go into the feminist issue real quick. I mean, I'm going to disagree with you, Anthony, on that because, I mean, partially disagree. There's a feminist flank going on parts of the film. I mean, because a couple of things. One is that the whole thing is done to save her father and to save the emperor, both male patriarchal figures. So it's kind of everything she does is in support of the patriarchy. You could say. Um, she does find some success as a soldier, but she's never really comfortable being a soldier. She's always very kind of off. She's drawn with her armor is always ill-fitting, and she always kind of is a little awkward with the other guys. And yeah, she does find success by her cleverness and her quickness and so forth, but she never becomes a really great fighter. She never outfights anybody or outslugs anybody. She just kind of outsmarts them.
Mhm.
Which is, it's like I don't think that
Well,
is
no,
being.
she has that duel with Sean Yu at the rooftops, where she disarms him.
And then she just disarms him and
Yeah, she just
holds him.
disarms him with a feminine article.
And, yeah,
But
and then
that's
she
the
uses
point. It's the conquest
her
of the
mushu to
feminine over the
shoot him.
masculine.
But I don't know. But then the thing is, but she's the heroine. She has to be the one to finish things off. But at the same time, Shang is the one who actually saves the emperor, and he doesn't dress in drag. He remains masculine, and he is the one who fights Shan Yu head to head, but just can't stand up to him because he's too big and strong. It's like
I'm not sure
I
too
thought,
that sorry, you first.
and then yeah, I just in context, I don't really get a nastily feminine, triumphalist tone from it, because the other men are, effective fighters as well.
Well, they couldn't do it at that
And
point.
they do more.
Like, there was an evolution of thought that went through here. Even though second wave feminists were calling for the castration of all men, nobody really could believe in that stuff. Like, that's the reason why the slippery slope is not a fallacy, is a saying in our circles now. It's because it wasn't a fallacy. It started off with things like, well, not Mulan, like the start was way back when, but you had Mulan, that's where the marker is, and then it slowly devolved from there. It doesn't matter that she used feminine wiles or this or that it happened. Its spirit was of the same spirit, and its inspiration was of the same inspiration.
Yeah, but a female warrior story is a legitimate kind of story, and it's not necessarily going to be part of that.
All right, so let's look at
Right.
the original legend again and what the point of it was. Because I have read, it was years ago. Like, I read one of the original poems, but I did read it. The point of the original story was actually pretty explicitly different than the point of the Disney movie. The point of the original story was something more along the lines of, humbling the men. Like, somebody has, first, it was 2 points. Filial piety. She is going to save her family from dishonor, even if it means she needs to fight herself. This is sort of kept in the movie, but I'll discuss that in a moment. In a different way, though, like a very specifically different way. And the second thing that the original legend had was not feminism. It was not women adding a perspective that the men couldn't have. It was more like the mighty are shown, something like, the meek shall inherit the earth kind of thing. The mighty are shown up by the weak. They did not give credit to this woman, so she was the one who saved all of China. It wasn't a feminist message. It wasn't an idea that, it wasn't a criticism of the entire society. It was a criticism of overlooking people, right? Just generally speaking. And the reason that you would overlook them is because women are weaker. Now, let's contrast with what actually happens in Mulan. The filial piety angle is there, but part of the problem is they are saying that the patriarchal society is flawed, that Mulan needs to have more freedom, more spirit. And part of the way that they're saying it's flawed is saying that Mulan can clearly contribute to the war effort. Now, I straight up disagree with this. Women should not be fighting in wars. It is dangerous. It is a mistake to allow that. And any society that would allow that is seriously flawed. You could look at the
Pardon?
exceptions, but the exceptions are the exceptions. Joan of Arc had a literal mission from God. She was directly told by saints and angels and even then, she never killed a man.
Pardon me.
Oh
Have
yeah.
you heard of the Soy Tang romance? That's another the ballad with Mulan, and it's got an interesting twist. I'm looking at the Galactic article on Hua Mulan. Uh, she's intercepted. This is after she's cross-dressed as a man and enlisted in her father's stead. She's intercepted by the forces of the Jia King Du Jian. I'm sorry, I'm mangling it, and is brought under questioning by the king's warrior daughter Xianyang, who tries to recruit Mulan as a man. Discovering Mulan is to be a fellow female warrior, she is so delighted that they become sworn sisters. Um, there's something else about this toward the end. Uh, yeah,
It's been years since I
she
read it, so
even
if that
worse.
happened, I don't know. I
Hang on.
believe you.
Yeah, no, this is the Sui Tang romance, and near the end. Yeah, there it is. Mulan is given. This is after the big battle. She's given leave to journey back to her homeland, and once arrangements were made for her parents to relocate, it is expected that they will all be living at the princess's old capital of Lishu. Mulan is devastated to discover her father has long died and her mother has. According to the novel, um, her mother's name was. He married a man named Wei. Even worse, the Khan has summoned her to the palace to become his concubine. Rather than to suffer this fate, she commits suicide. But before she dies, she entrusts an errand to her younger sister, which was to deliver her sworn sister's letter to sworn sister's fiance or her fiance. It's not clear. Luo Chang. His young sister dresses as a man to make her delivery, but her disguise is discovered, and it arouses her recipient's amorous attention. So there are differences, and this is probably one of the things that always comes in with an adaptation. If you've got several different ones to choose from, you can mix and match. There have been exceptions throughout history to women in battle. The Celts are famous for their warrior queens who actually would get paint themselves blue and go to battle. And
Oh
and
no, Ben disappeared.
Mhm.
and I would let's see.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. There was
So I'm going to pause here and say you are bringing up exceptions, and they are not the rule, nor should they be the rule. In societies where they were the rule, I would argue that those were wounded and sick societies, including our own.
Yeah, I agree. But Mulan's an exception too. She doesn't stay in the army.
She is, that's true. But I think
Um,
that I'm
she
going to put it to you this way. This isn't.
explicitly goes back and adopts a female role. She gets married. Guy comes
So
and asks for a date.
I'm going to put it to you this way. If you went up to the creators of Mulan today and you asked them, so Mulan was a very conservative story, would they be delighted that you finally cracked the code or horrified?
Oh, they
I
And
probably
don't
if
think
you
they
asked
care.
them, is this a feminist story? Would they go, yes, exactly? Or would they say, no, of course not. It's arch conservative.
would say it's feminist, but but the intent. I'm gonna say,
See, I'm not a believer in death of the author.
but the thing is, I think good stories, are naturally conservative or traditionalist in form. So it's like they got the feminist stuff going on there, especially in her big song and so forth. But I think the core of the story is very conservative and very traditionalist because it's all about her. Because it's really all about her, family.
See, I think it's there to
And
make it work as a story, but I think that the direction that the story is pushing you, which is what Ben was getting at, it's a step down the line. The direction that the story is pushing you is towards more feminism in the future. Talk to fans of Mulan today, not in our circles, but I mean on the wider internet. Like just general people, what we would call normies.
if I
And
may,
you'll talk to a lot. I'll let you. I'm sorry. I just want to finish this one sentence, and I promise you can speak to your heart's content. Uh, if you talk to a lot of people who are fans of Mulan today, a lot of them will say that inspired them not to, be more loyal to their families, but to be true to themselves. To fight against the status quo, because that's what Mulan is trying to push.
It may
Go
be
ahead,
trying to
Caroline.
push this, but one of the things that makes it a reverse feminist story for me is the cultural context. If they had wanted to beat us over the head with more women should be in the military, I can see where they were trying to. The issue is the setting. The setting itself is China. China is everything the feminists claim the West is. It's very repressive and very, even now in China, they have, if you listen to reports, you hear very, very horrifying stories about them kidnapping little girls, and there even are reports of them buying brides from Pakistan because the one child policy, girls were not favored over boys. They always aborted the girls or got rid of the girls in order to secure their lines, the male to inherit the household. Sorry. So this is what they claim happened or was preferred in the West. It does not fly in the current culture where we live, even back at the time in 1998. It does not fly even now. But what's the films can you name where, or stories? It doesn't really matter. The hero always has the daughter. It's actually very annoying for me right now. Is the hero is always given a daughter. Iron Man gets a daughter in Endgame. Um, um, Hawkeye is replaced in the comics by a girl. It's everywhere you look. It's girl replaces the man. This is of course not 50 years ago in any media you could probably think of, except here and there where it would serve the story. But the point is that in the West, boys were never preferred to the extent that they are in the East over daughters. So this is one of the big things where the attempt to make it a feminist screed falls flat for me, and I don't think it actually accomplishes what they set out to accomplish with it, because if you look around anywhere in the United States, the attitude that they proclaim and set up in Mulan fits very well for Chinese culture, and to some extent, varying on whichever country you choose, in Asia. It does not fit here in the West. It does not fit here in Europe because we have very easy access even to the normies can tell you who Queen Elizabeth I is. They can tell you Catherine the Great was a queen. They can tell you about Anne Boleyn. They can tell you about all these various women. Well, if they overcame the patriarchy in this particular setting, then how do you suppose that a Chinese culture, a film set specifically in the ultra patriarchal culture of China, can be as effective as something set in Regency England or using a Celtic queen or a Celtic princess? That would be more effective for feminist propaganda. I had to find the word than Mulan in my book, because Mulan is very much a part of, even with the Disney movie, the Chinese culture. Why it's interesting to me that the story writer, the head of story, said, no, this romance, this Tootsie style romance is annoying. It's not doing us any favors. We need to follow the original legend more. And this is why you have Mulan leaving home, because of the love of her father. Something else in this vein as well, you were talking about how the culture or society that relies on having women in the field is an ill one. I agree. The point, though, with Mulan is that the culture she is living in is ill. Her father is an old man. Now they add in as a limp and other medical conditions. When he takes out the sword and he does his katas, his practice, and he gets a cramp and he drops the sword. So they are conscripting a man who cannot fight. He is too old. He is weak. He will die if he doesn't die on the field, he will die in training. What kind of culture not only conscripts young women, but what kind of culture would conscript an old man who is not infirm precisely, but he is ill? This is the area where I think Mulan actually goes and writes. That was the right or renews civilization because it restores the respect that her father deserves by her putting her life on the line. And the feminist message is there, but it is out of context with the target that they are aiming at. It hits China rather than the West. And it makes a very good point that not only is it makes a very good point that anyone who would conscript an old man who can't fight is not in a good place.
I'm going to push back a little against that. I think because he is a seasoned veteran, granted he's not going to survive the battlefield now, but it's like he makes the point there that survival isn't the important thing for him. It's maintaining the family honor. And when she gets to the camp, they react to his name like, "Oh, you're this guy's son." So it's like, him being called up again is, from his perspective, it's a mark of respect. Her perspective, she takes it up in order to save his life. So I don't know if I would call it a sick society aspect. Certainly not to the extent of having women fight, which the Mongols actually did, by the way. I think as far as the feminists versus
fight or shoot arrows from the back, because people talk about that for the Scythians and other things. It's like, oh, Queen Semiramis, led the battle. It's like, no, she had like 3 husbands, who were specifically married to her because they were generals, and they fought, and she was there too. Like, there's differences to it. In China, there are not even laws against beating your wife. Recently, I read an article, and these are by people who lived in China who have very deep ties to China, where a guy at a barbecue, well, their equivalent of a barbecue restaurant, basically beat his wife in front of everyone. No one even knows why. What they did was they separated them for a month, said them fix it, and then they go back. If we're being told, like, just looking at everything, very few civilizations treat women as humans. Christians are one of them. Some where their situation is so dire that they are required to fight, like with the Scythians and others, on occasion in very rare circumstances, treat them better. But the fact is that it doesn't exist. Like in China, they had wars where people just ate each other because they were starving to death. And they would eat tens of thousands of their own people just because there's a siege going on, which we would not consider anything. The value of a human life in China is so low as to be incalculable. Not even counting Mao's Great Leap Forward, which killed tens of millions of them. And they willingly did it. But so it's like, I dig it. I dig what you guys are saying, but the fundamental thing is not even the Mulan writers get it right, because when they met her sister, when they met her, when they tried to get her into the imperial harem or whatever it was, they were not viewing her as a person, but as an object to be desired. Like, that's the subtext of the real history. There was a Song emperor who would kill one of his concubines, have her cooked, And then when he served her to his guests, who of course ate, he would show her face, her head, and say, "Ah, I've killed one of my beautiful ones to you, my honored guests." Like, I dig it. I dig what you guys are saying, but I'm starting to get frustrated here because the context is, in real history, women were basically farm animals to
Yep.
almost every culture but ours.
Okay. That's not really what I'm trying to get at here.
Okay.
I'm just kind of focusing on the film as a film. Basically, what I was going to get at is that it seems to me like the feminist and versus the conservative aspect of the film is kind of a depends on what you bring to it. If people, modern, normies today are going to approach and say, "Oh, woman is going to the army, girls doing it for herself as a feminist film." Someone more like me is going to say, "Oh, it's girls going to defend her father and her country and her king. This is a conservative film, a patriarchal film." So I think this is one of those. I think this is one of those films which kind of is what you take from it is depends on
So,
what you
I
bring.
agree with this completely. I would argue that that was entirely their point. It was a transition film to the feminist era. This is where I sort of disagree with Caroline. While I totally agree with you that it is a pointed critique of China, this film was not directed towards China. It was directed towards the entire world, America included. No child watching this film is going to think, man, I have finally seen China taken down a peg as they deserve. No, they're going to say it's inspiring. It's an inspiring feminist film. Slay girls sweat, slay. That's the message that they're
Actually, I
going to
think
take
the
away
biggest
from
thing
the
I took
film.
away from the sorry, I think the
So,
biggest thing I took away
yeah,
from
go
the
ahead.
film at the time was pretty dresses.
Right. Very young kids are entirely that's like the main takeaway of the very young kids. I worked at Walmart at the time, and Elsa was very popular. Why was Elsa popular? She wore a pretty dress and she had a catchy song. That's it. She was not even the most interesting of the two princesses in the movie, but she wore the pretty dress, she had the catchy song, so that's who all the kids wanted to dress up as. Yeah,
Uh,
like that's just kind of the way that it goes. But when I look at what they were trying to do with Mulan, you're absolutely right. It's a Rorschach test of a film because it's a transition film into the feminist era of Disney. Again, this is why I think if you were to watch them, we're interpreting it in two different ways. But if it to be interpreted, I think they would say it was as up their word in that matter.
Well,
oh,
I agree they'd probably say that and intend it, but I think stories can take on a life of their own and act beyond what the writers intended and contrary to
I
it.
think they definitely can, but I don't think that it's nearly as clear in Mulan. Like, I don't think that watching Mulan, there is no way to get a feminist message out of it. This is where, like, I especially, you guys aren't saying this so much, which I can appreciate, but, like, this was John C. Wright's interpretation of the film, and the tremendous respect that I have for John aside, I have quoted him frequently throughout these discussions, and almost every time in a positive manner. But I must strongly disagree with the implication that Mulan is somehow an arch conservative movie. Now, you can interpret it in that way if you so choose. Sure, fine. I mean, you could honestly do that with most things, especially if they're well written. If they're well written, it's going to be hard to not find a conservative interpretation, since those are where the fundamentals of good storytelling lie. But to say that Mulan is actually an absurdly traditional, patriarchal, conservative film, I think is stretching the matter to the breaking point. I don't think that that was the intention of it. I don't think that is what anybody who made the film was thinking when they did it. And I don't think that's what most people get out of it either. The dialogue surrounding the film today is not that unless you're talking to people in our circles who are always going to be inclined to interpret things in that direction, especially things that we like.
Yeah, but then again, part of that is that normies and most people talking about the film don't really have much of a understanding of what even conservative film or conservative kind of story looks like, what the elements would be.
Sure, but that's kind of the fault of Disney, right? They're trying to do that.
The
They're
other thing,
Well,
eliminating
that's
how
the fault of
that's
the
supposed to
culture.
look. I think that Disney is driving the culture at least to a certain extent. I don't think they're the sole drivers
Oh,
of
at the
the
moment,
culture.
certainly they're practically synonymous with the film industry as a whole, or the entertainment industry as a whole at this point. So yeah, certainly.
And the fact that they could influence how children think about it is different. I'm going to contrast this with we were talking about the potential feminist interpretations of Beauty and the Beast. There is a difference here I see in the dialogue surrounding it. If you talk about what people appreciate about Beauty and the Beast today, it is only among the radical left that you will see feminist interpretations. And everybody else will either give it a conservative interpretation or what you might call a normie interpretation. Just, true love conquers all generic type stuff. You'd have to look to the radicals to see people going like it's actually secretly feminist.
Yeah,
Or very cynical, as we found, like a very cynical
yeah.
conservative.
I think
Whereas with Mulan, I don't think that's what you see. I think the dialogue is conservatives see it as conservative, normies see it as feminist.
yeah. But part of that, of course, is just the kind of story it is. That it's about about a female warrior, exceptional female warrior. Because other normies would call Joan of Arc feminist today.
I
Sure, but
think
I think that Joan of Arc, there is significant differences to the
Oh
story. But
yeah,
go
of
ahead,
course.
Caroline.
no, I'm just thinking that it depends on how much people are paying attention, or how much they think you want to hear. If you just say, "Oh, Mulan, I really like that movie," and if they don't know which way you lean, and if they haven't thought about it, they just repeat what other people have said, or they just don't think about it. They just say, "Yeah, I love the movie, and I love this, and I love that." Most people don't take a deep view of stories. I This is something I've found when I get into discussions with some. They don't see anything like that. They just think, "Oh, it's a great movie. I enjoyed that." They don't necessarily stop to think why. Don't necessarily stop to think it through. That's kind of where we come in. And yes, to a degree, the intent of the creators matters. And if it's actively intended to be terrible, like James Joyce's books, nobody's going to bother with it. You have to. They make you read certain books in school, and nobody likes them. But nobody goes. And if you argue why X book is bad, then they can say, "Well, explains why I didn't like it." And only certain people in other sections will be upset about it. You're explaining why it's bad, for instance. So
So,
it depends on what people take to it. It depends what they take away from it. It depends too on how they grow up with it, or how they grow up after seeing it. There, I I really liked Mulan when I saw it first. I still enjoy it a great deal. And one of the things, this might have been the storyteller in me. I love the aesthetic. I love the not just the pretty dresses, but the buildings and the implied different culture. And I started daydreaming about it, and I started asking questions about it, and I started thinking about it. This is how I ended up learning a lot of things about China, including Chinese foot binding. If you don't know what it is, you can look it up. They say it's no longer practiced. I wouldn't bet on it. But that was one of the things that convinced me to be very glad that I wasn't born in at any point in its history, and to make me have a greater appreciation of Western culture. That doesn't necessarily mean that anybody else looked past, "Oh, this is a story set in China. It's typical girl power." And these days, the girl power is so in your face that people are tired of it. So they might say, "Yeah, it was a great feminist movie." And then when they get home, "Oh gosh, I ran into someone who was talking about it and couldn't stop talking about how great a feminist movie it was. Ugh, I need to go watch something else to purge my brain." So we this is something that bothers me about picking on normies, quote unquote, is if if they don't know and they aren't interested in looking, we can't exactly hold that against anybody. And the thing is, all we can do is explain why we like, why it's a self-defeating message, because there's plenty of places. Mulan is actually they still it, but it is. Mm, I think in some ways it's memory hold. The fact that the live action movie, I don't know how well it did, but I know it was not as well beloved as the original.
To put it
So,
mildly.
mhm,
Yeah. So my point isn't to blame normies in any way. I'm not blaming them. I'm doing the opposite, actually. I'm saying that we have a blind spot. Me, you, Ben, David. I am the sort of person who watches analysis videos for fun. This is the sort of thing that I enjoy doing. I like thinking through my media. I like doing deep dives. I like to examine if do I like something for subjective reasons or are there objective reasons something is good? Is there, is a criticism fair or unfair? For example, I don't think that all criticisms that something is feminist or not feminist are automatically and intention automatically mean that something is worthless. I have defended and will continue to defend Princess Mononoke on those grounds. I think that at the very least, the understanding of what feminism is in Japan and what Miyazaki understood by it and what is being presented in Princess Mononoke is very different from how we understand it in the West. I also even question if Miyazaki was intending to make a feminist film, because if you ask him about it, he does not describe Princess Mononoke at any point as a feminist movie unless it's an answer to a question of someone saying, "Do you consider Princess Mononoke feminist?" And he goes and he says something to the effect of, "Yeah, I consider it feminist." Like if you want to think of it that way, be my guest type of thing. So I don't think that the criticism always holds water, and I don't even necessarily think that the intention of the creator to be feminist ends the discussion, right? Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. Nor do I think that people's interpretations are always necessarily right. So I've seen people who utterly reject Princess Mononoke on the grounds that it is feminist, which I think misses the point of the movie, right? That's the reason that I'm bringing that film up specifically. But with what I'm saying is we actually might have a bit of a blind spot because we're the people who like to think this stuff over. When you talk to somebody who doesn't like to think this stuff over, who just watches the film and enjoys it, and what's sticking with them later, what's going to stick with them is the woman warrior movie where Mulan saved everyone, right? That is the point of Mulan. That is where they're trying to push the culture. Once you dig into it, yeah, you can maybe get a conservative interpretation out of it if you're somebody who is so inclined, or you could get a leftist interpretation out of it if you're somebody who is so inclined. But if you're going to ask the general mass of people, I think that they would kind of just consider it feminist without really thinking, because most people just consider themselves feminists on a very basic level. Like, not radical feminists. I'm not saying that everybody in the world is a radical feminist, but if they go, yeah, like,
They default to that.
right, they would go, oh yeah, I believe in equal rights for women. Why wouldn't I? Yeah, I agree. Milan is just saying that women can do what anything men can do, and I appreciate that message. That's just the default. That's how people think nowadays. That's how we've been conditioned to think. And I actually even disagree with that to an extent. I think that that's kind of a dangerous message once you dig into the nuances of it, but it's how people think nowadays. And part of the reason that they think like that is because of the formative media.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think it's like a different, separate discussion. What's like what the film objectively contains and how it works the story versus how it's perceived in the culture as a whole and how it fits in there.
Right. And to be clear, I don't think Mulan is a bad movie. Like, I actually think it works quite well as a film.
Right.
Structurally, story wise, I think that the music is catchy. I mean, I'll Make a Man Out of You is honestly one of the all time great Disney songs. Uh, And it's also it's an ironic song, both intentionally in film and the life of its own that's kind of grown outside of it.
Yeah, that's fair. Um, yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's a really good film myself. I mean, it's got its flaws. It's a good, not great film, I'd say. Um,
Right, I would agree with that. Uh, so I'm going to segue here because it's connected. This is definitely connected, and we're going to keep on brand here. Because there was a question I asked you last time, and I think Caroline might have mentioned this to you, so we'll discuss it now. There was a question that I asked last time, which is there a running thread in Disney's films? And your answer, which is correct, by the way, is that Disney really didn't like to repeat himself, which is true, he didn't. They actually are quite different from each other, his early movies, But after reading your book and then thinking it over and also thinking through some of the films we didn't discuss, I actually see two main running threads that go through most of Walt Disney's work. So I want to discuss this one first because it connects almost directly to what we're discussing now with the fall of modern Disney, because this message that is in most of Disney's early work is not only contradicted by modern Disney, I think that modern Disney is embarrassed by it. And it's the importance of the traditional family structure and the inadequacy of attempting to replace the traditional family structure. You see this theme in so many of his films. Old Yeller, Song of the South. It is a minor theme, but it's present in Cinderella and Snow White, and it is most explicit of all in Mary Poppins.
oh yeah, definitely. Also, Lady and the Tramp. Um,
Yeah, that's true.
101 Dalmatians. I mean, not really so much the inadequacy of placing it, but the importance of the family structure.
Right, the importance of the family structure. The inadequacy of replacing it is really what sticks out to me here. So you see it in, again, there are really two movies that stand out to me as being very specific about replacements can help as surrogates. Like, they are not useless, they
Yeah.
have a role, but they are not the same. And that is Song of the South, and especially Mary Poppins.
Oh yeah,
Mary Poppins is extremely explicit about this.
right. That's the whole point of the film, really.
Yeah, exactly. It actually ends with, who is it? Bert says to her something along the
Yeah,
lines of,
the umbrella says to her, "Oh, like they care more
yeah,
about
thank
your
you.
father than about you." Yeah, that's as it should be.
Right, which is a wonderful line. And again, in a movie that aesthetically rubs me the wrong way, I have nothing but, objective. Like I said, I am a believer in objective quality. So I have nothing but praise for the objective film itself. It works structurally as a story and what it's trying to do, and that is a wonderful line. Uh, And I think it really gets to the heart of a lot of what Disney does in his movies. It's people who he sees a role for, like what modern Disney would call surrogate family. And you see them doing this in like Big Hero 6. They form a surrogate family. Uh, there's another one that I had in mind. Oh, Frozen is very big on the inadequacy of the traditional family. It
Oh
downplays the
yeah,
importance of marriage, and it really heavily criticizes the role of the mother and father and blames them for a lot of their problems.
yeah.
Ben, were you going to say something?
Failures in that movie, which is something that really bugs me about it. Not just from the moral perspective, from the storytelling perspective. It's like all these years they see it's not working. They never think to just go back and ask the troll again.
Yeah.
But that's another story. Yeah, I mean the thing is though, I think Walt Disney had a very clear idea of his own place and his work's own place in the grander scheme of things. His whole goal, really, with his films and his theme park and so forth, was to support the work of the parents of the family unit. He wanted, these are films that parents can feel safe sending their kids to, taking their kids to, that parents can use to help raise their kids, that the parents will enjoy as well, the whole family can go to. He wanted Disneyland to be a place where it's like he got the idea for it because he used to on weekends take his daughters to different to parks and places, and he was always kind of disappointed with them and thought these aren't really built for families to actually come and spend the day and spend time with each other. So he wanted to try to build a place that would do that. How successful he was is another question, but that was the intention. Um, and like you say, Mary Poppins and Song of the South in particular are very much kind of in the book I call them Disney apologias. Basically, him kind of illustrating his own role in the family structure. That I'm kind of there to support you and kind of as a bit of a crutch almost to help things along, but I'm not the replacement you did.
Right, exactly. And you see this in his films too. Like, Mary Poppins is the most explicit about it, but it's also in Song of the South.
Mm-hmm.
The father is worried because he's worried about how Remus is affecting his child and that it's undermining his role in the family. What was that?
It's the mother. The father is absent.
Mother, sorry. Yeah, mother. She's worried that's undermining her role in the family. You get the same thing in I have it written down here. Let me try and pull it up. I had another one written down. Yeah, you get and in Cinderella and Snow White, it's a little bit different, but it's the same general idea where, like, in Cinderella, this is one of the things why people don't like it and why I think Disney is embarrassed by it nowadays. But the point that Disney was getting at is that a stepmother is not a mother. Stepsisters are not sisters. They're fake. They're substitutes. So how does Cinderella fix the matter? How does she get her life back on track? By marrying someone and starting a traditional family the right way.
Well, I mean, it's not come down on stepmothers as such. There are good stepmothers in the world.
Oh yeah, no, I'm making though a fairy tale point here. Like, what is the fairy tale point?
Yeah, that she does not treat her as her own daughter.
Right.
She treats her as a rival to her daughters.
Like, I totally agree with you, but that's like that goes back to the criticism of, like, ugly doesn't always equal good and or bad, and good doesn't always equal nice. Yes, you are correct in real life.
Story, it's a matter of
of a shorthand for the language.
Yeah.
The shorthand is the stepmother is not a mother. The stepsisters are not sisters. Cinderella needs to go out and she needs to create a quote unquote a real family, right? And with the aid of her real father, who, by the way, remarries because he recognizes the lack and chooses wrongly.
Yeah, it says that he married her because he wanted his daughter to have a mother.
Yeah,
which makes it all the more kind of
cruel.
Yeah, that she explicitly refuses to be a mother to her.
This is also, it's in Snow White, though lesser. Like, she forms a surrogate family with the dwarfs, and while the dwarfs have a role, their role is not the final role. You can't end Snow White by having her living a happy life with the dwarfs. That wouldn't be satisfying. They are a substitute. They are not the real thing. That's not to say that they are not worthwhile in their own right. They have a role to play, but that role isn't to be the same as a real family.
Right, correct.
And I think it's really interesting looking at this and seeing just how uncomfortable modern Disney is by all of this. They really hate that message.
Yeah, to be sure. They always it always seems like it's the family you make is triumphing. It's held up as superior.
Yeah, exactly. And you get like the flaw. The other thing too is even in movies that aren't like that, you have movies that are about the flaws of the traditional family. A good example of this, and again, I don't think this is a bad movie per se, but is Encanto, right?
I haven't seen that.
So I haven't. I've read John C. Wright's review of it, and so I know the plot in detail, and I've watched all the songs at various points in time. As through osmosis over time, seeing them pop up, I've seen all the music eventually.
Mhm.
So the plot of Encanto is about the flaws of how a traditional family can mess up the children. And yes, the family repairs at the end, but it is very specifically about how your family can ruin your life. And I feel like that earlier Disney would not have done this. They would have done like
Oh
Mary
no.
Poppins,
Oh
which
yeah.
is a little bit different. What's going on in Mary Poppins is not so much that the father and the mother are ruining their lives by what they do, but that by not being a part of their lives, it's ruining their life. That is a subtle but very, very significant difference.
Yeah. They're not doing their jobs. They're not being involved enough with the children.
So it's just interesting that you get modern Disney in a film like Encanto, and Encanto is about your family is, how your family holds you back, and that they need to, learn better and be fixed, right? The grandmother needs to admit her mistake and
Yeah, you need to be yourself and learn to get out of your way, kind of thing.
uh-huh. And the reason Encanto works is because in Encanto, for once, they kind of put together a story and like a plot line that supports all of this, at
Mhm.
least to an extent. Like Frozen, it's very much, we talked about this before, where like they had to change the story around. It didn't really make sense. It is very artificial in the way that it supports its, more modernist message, and it's really uncomfortable. Encanto is not so much because Encanto, like they really do put the work in. Like John was mentioning a few things. Those, for example, there are a lot of mixed marriages in Encanto. He says, now I have no doubt that the reason that they did this was because it's pleasing to modern eyes, but in fact, it is actually normal for the setting, right? Like for where they were, like that is not an uncommon thing to see, light skin, dark skin marriages. But they almost certainly did it because they wanted to, make progressives smile.
Yeah.
Similarly, he mentions that they have the sister has super strength, and they go, now normally you make a woman overly masculine and you are breaking some sort of rules of fairy tales, but Encanto is clever in its writing here, and that they make it a metaphor for the role of an older sister taking care of a younger sister and the responsibilities that entails. And in that sense, it works. This is why Encanto is generally a decent movie, but even so, it's a movie that has to fit itself around these modern messages
Mhm.
that Disney probably would have been uncomfortable with showing. I think he would have wanted a very different type of story if he were the one in charge of Encanto.
Yeah, probably. I mean, like I said, I haven't seen it. I don't really know much about it, so I can't give specifics about what she probably might have done instead.
One of the interesting things now that we're on this subject is Lilo and Stitch, which also has a broken family, but it's broken not because of It's broken because Lilo and Nani's parents died, and Nani is now struggling to do her best to take care of her sister. Protective Services have gotten involved, and one of the lines that really always hit me in that movie is when at the end, at near the climax, the house burns down, and Cobra Bubbles is getting ready to take Lilo away, and Nani tr- tries him not to eventually, and the firemen have to hold her back when she says, "No, you can't take her away from me. I'm the only one who understands her. She needs me." And Cobra, what she needs, gesturing to the house. It seems to me you need her a lot more than she needs you. But the fact is, they both need each other because they're the only family they have left. And so yes, they do have a found family, but at the same time, it's I think you also have her dating David, um, Nani that is, and Lilo taking in and civilizing Stitch, so that even though And Stitch admits it actually at the end. It's little and broken, but it's still good.
Yeah. In Lilo and Stitch, they really they feel the brokenness of it. It's presented as being something, not normal, not good, but something that just happens sometimes, and you have to make the best of it.
Right, and they also show the superiority. Like, there is a real importance in Lilo and her sister staying together
Yeah,
because you have an understanding with your biological sister that you can't have with a stranger, no matter how well meaning.
right. And also just the fact that Nani really struggles to fill the role of a mother and a guardian. Lilo says to her, "I like you a lot better as a big sister than as a mother." Because again, she's still a teenager herself. It's not how things are supposed to work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's acknowledged in the movie. So I think Lilo and Stitch is a good example of, like, what a quote unquote found family story kind of should look like, as opposed to what it often ends up being. Like, it in Lilo and it shouldn't be like, it's not a substitute for the traditional family. Uh, at best, the best thing that a found family can be to someone is if that family is broken, they could step in a way, though, that will inevitably be lesser. But that doesn't mean bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and kind of intending to lead towards establishing their own traditional families.
Right, exactly. And it's also that you should be trying to push towards that traditional family model
Mhm.
because that's the correct model. That's the model you should have. Uh,
The healthy model, which actually
right.
kind of ties in with Wall-E too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Wally's an interesting movie. I always really, really liked Wally, especially the first half, or the first really, like, 20 minutes of the film that's almost entirely silent is outstanding.
yeah,
And there is a brilliant bit of visual storytelling in the middle of the movie when Wally gets quote unquote injured, and he's trying to tell Eve how he could be repaired, which is put me in the sun and the sun will charge my batteries and that'll help fix me. You know.
yeah. He
Uh
points to his eye, reminding her of how he repaired himself.
right, he starts flicking the lighter, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is a honestly, I've always been very impressed that they resisted the impulse to flash back to the scene in that moment.
hmm
Because I always thought, like, in a lesser movie, they would have flashed back and shown the scene and then flashed there, but they don't. They just have Wally flicking the light, and then they have the light bulb click in Eve's head, and they trust the audience enough to get the connection.
yeah, yeah. Wall-E is one of my top 10 films of all time. Yeah,
Oh, yeah? I
yeah.
can understand that. I very much enjoy Wally. It's definitely one of my favorite romance movies, and it is a romance,
Oh yeah,
I
very
think.
much so. Kind of going into it, kind of transitioning off of leading from the traditional family model. One thing I liked is that when the humans are all kind of something at the end, the kids are the babies are all crying, and the automated nanny is remain calm, pointing at the little digital display, and
Hmm.
the kids don't stop crying until Mary and John, the two humans, catch them and hold them, and then they're suddenly comfortable because they're experiencing actual human contact.
Yeah, and I really love her line, "John, get ready to have some kids."
Yeah, uh,
Yeah, I think that the second half, or the post Earth section of the movie, I know this is the traditional view, so I'm not saying anything new here, but I don't think it's as good as the first part of it, but I also think it's better than people give it credit for. Like, people, like to say there's this huge quality drop. I've even heard it called half of a good movie before. And I don't agree with that. I do think that that section of the movie has a lot to like about it. Uh, a
it's
whole lot to like about it.
I mean, it's not as unique or as original as the first half, but I think it's still great. There's still all kinds of awesome stuff about it.
Now, if you want to talk about a conservative message, I think that there's a leftist message in the, environmental stuff there, but honestly, the environmental stuff isn't even really a part of the movie. It's
Yeah,
only it's only backdrop.
I mean, I don't
The
agree that environmental concern is strictly a leftist issue itself. I mean, it's used to push leftist ideas rather inconsistently, given how socialist societies operate in that regard. But I think it's a universal idea in itself. I think
What gets me
stewardship
too about
of the earth,
you first.
especially in this case, because the way Wall-E frames it is very much as a matter of responsibility that the earth needs humanity.
Yeah, I
It is
agree.
an integral part of the whole system, and it's their responsibility to kind of take care of the planet and take care of the environment. But it's not a matter of humans just need to get out of the way and live in harmony with nature. It's a matter of
And I
sort
would
of
go
a more
so
authoritative responsibility.
Yeah, and I would go so far as to say that, like, that whole section, the second half, I call it, even though it's probably more like the second 2/3, but whatever. Yeah, the post Earth section of Wally, in terms of its explicit messaging, is extremely conservative, almost shockingly conservative.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
What were you going to say, Caroline?
Oh, I was just going to say one of the very interesting things about Wall-E is the fact that the plant comes back. That's the wrong term, but the fact that the plant shows up at all in the first part. Oh, we're going to run out of oil in 10 years, or this or that or the other thing. What's the one thing that all living creatures have in common? They produce oil, and this is a bit out there for some interpretations, but the thing is, after a point, a planet is a living organism, and Earth, as any other living organism, produces oil. So you might run oil dry in a certain area, but that doesn't mean it won't fill back in after a certain time. And the thing, Wall-E actually shows this in a different way, with that the plants come back on their own, but Earth is not complete if the plants just return and take over the cities and the machines that have been left behind. Humanity comes back, and then you see them plant the shoe and the plant that Wall-E to Earth, and then you pan out, and there's already a bunch of plants that are sprouting on the hillside. The Earth is renewed, or is coming back, and Wall-E is the messenger who takes it to humanity out in space so that the whole is reunited. You can't have a pristine. I actually wrote a post about this on my newsletter, that Earth without humans is just an empty rock. It might be a very pretty empty rock, but it's an empty rock. It doesn't mean anything any more than any other planet in the solar system or the galaxy or the universe, unless people are here.
Yeah. I noticed that when the axiom, I love this detail, when the axiom returns to Earth, it breaks through the cloud layer, and that's the first time you see blue sky in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you think about it as a conservative film. You think about it really, Wall-E he's holding on to the remnants of past culture, past civilization. He's like the only one left who remembers that and still cares about it. And him being brought by accident into the axiom reminds people of what they were and what they can become again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
I'm going to segue off of this because there's some connection there. We're at 8:25 now, so we have some time, but there was a second running theme that I saw in Disney's movies. The first was what I was saying, the importance of the traditional family. As you said, it goes to what Disney saw his role as, which is support of the traditional family, right? And support of the parents, particularly. So he was never going to do anything to undermine them. Which, by the way, contrasts this with like Turning Red recently from Disney Pixar. But anyway, Disney was going to specifically not undermine them. There's a second theme, though, and I think this one is more just in line with Disney's sensibilities than any perceived responsibility. And that is civilization over barbarism is
Yeah.
something that pops up a lot. You particularly three of the live action movies you talked about, Swiss Family Robinson, Treasure Island, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yep.
But one other movie, Disney's last film, that you did not mention in there, but is worth bringing up for this point, Jungle Book, is essentially about this. And this is the reason that the new Jungle Book, as entertaining as it was at times, ultimately fails.
I don't know if I would say it ultimately fails. I kind of feel like they were deferring his departure because he does ultimately end up taking up his heritage as a man and defeating the Shere Khan with the tools of of humanity.
So my problem with the new Jungle Book is very simply this: that the end of the final scene of the original Jungle Book is quite arguably the capstone to Disney's entire career, right? Which makes sense because it was his final movie.
Yep.
But
and he was the one who pushed for that scene. He had to fight Ollie Johnson to get it made.
He was absolutely correct. It is an utterly brilliant sequence in a film that I think is more good than bad, but certainly not a masterpiece.
Oh yeah,
that scene, really does feel like everything Disney has been trying to say his entire career is said perfectly in that scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree. It's a perfect capstone because Mowgli basically he has to leave his carefree childhood behind to go and join humanity and join a family.
And it's so beautiful because it's a song about civilization that tells you what civilization is, right? Like it's I get the water, my husband takes care of me, right?
Father's hunting in the forest, mother's cooking in the home. I know special water until I have a husband of my own.
Right, and it's not like she doesn't say it in such a way that would make you, that doesn't imply that it won't be difficult, that there won't be hardships, but when you compare it to you could see why somebody like Baloo, a carefree, lazy layabout, would go, no, why would you ever want that?
Yeah.
But you could also see the immediate appeal. And of course, there is a secondary appeal that they don't say, which is the appeal of, the woman as a civilizing influence over a male that Disney was very keenly aware of, and he is also aware of in Swiss Family Robinson.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Caroline, were you going to say something?
The Jungle Book, but the Lion King, we were actually talking about that last time. One of the things I was thinking about, because it has a Fisher King vibe with Scar. When he takes over the Pride Lands, it's not immediate, but the circle of life goes out of balance, and the Pride Lands become this wasteland because there's a drought, because the land is tied to the king, and when the king is bad, the land suffers, and everybody in it. One of the things I find very interesting on reflection about it is when you have the fight, and the fire comes in, and it's a purge. The water, the rain, when it comes back, does some extra purging. You see the animal skull get knocked off and washed away, but the fire itself is a purge of causing the scar left behind.
Yeah.
As a new king rises and restores the kingdom and restores the land.
And also just the fact that Scar maintained his power through, basically barbarism through hiring the hyenas and letting them run rampant. So kind of following that same theme kind of plays out in Lion King.
Yeah, and you mentioned, David, that it was in some ways a beat for Bambi, but this is, I think, one of the areas where it's different from Bambi. Bambi is not any force in the society itself that causes the fire. It's something outside of the society's control, outside of any individual members of the society. Something that comes upon them suddenly, whereas Scar was intentional.
Yeah. Yeah, in Bambi, it's an external catastrophe that falls upon them. There's not Bambi's a lot more of a kind of a personal coming of age story. Whereas Lion King tries to kind of tie him into the larger society and a bit more.
Yeah, and I would say too that Lion King is also incredibly arch conservative, which I've noticed the smarter critics understand. A lot of critics actually try to ignore that because it's so uncomfortable to them. But I've seen smarter critics say, I recognize that, I like it, but it's so entertaining, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is fair enough, I guess. But uh, like Lion King is honestly so conservative, it might even be a little bit too conservative for most Americans. Like if you really if you really think over what it's saying,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
almost a divine right of kings type thing going on in the movie.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a monarchical film, which I'm fine with. But it's,
Yeah,
I mean, it's, I don't know, it doesn't really satisfy me in that regard too much because Simba's kind of not a very kingly character, unfortunately. But just the fact that, it's important that he takes his place, and specifically him, because he's the one who's supposed to be the next in line, he's the rightful king, makes it, kind of in that Shakespearean tradition.
incidentally, there was a sequel to The Lion King, Lion King 2, that is generally considered by most people to be like one of the better direct-to-video sequels. Now that is an extremely low bar, to be
Yeah,
clear, but I would say as somebody who I own that movie like from years ago, saw it a couple times I think. It is probably like an above average movie. At the very least, I will say that it has good music. We know that it has good music because one of the songs from Lion King 2 actually made it into the Broadway show.
right.
He Lives in You, which is quite a good song, by the way.
Okay.
Uh, it's a
Yeah,
good song that actually would have fit very well in the original Lion King, but it comes from Lion King 2 and it made it into the Broadway show.
I did not
So, Lion King
see
is
the film
really
a long time ago, but yeah, in a while.
Lion King is really interesting as a franchise to me because how after the first one, became like, you see it advertised in magazines and things as Hamlet in the Serengeti. And they started kind of embracing the Shakespearean aspect to Lion King, so they made the sequel, Romeo and Juliet, very, very, very explicitly Romeo and Juliet, like even more explicitly than the first one was Hamlet. And they made Lion King 1.5, which is a Timon and Pumbaa side story that very clever, or very, I suppose, in the know viewers will recognize as their own take on the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead.
Yeah,
Uh, Now, this is like the most normie take possible that you could possibly have on that extremely highbrow to the point of almost being snooty story. Uh, with that said, I actually think Lion King 1.5 is pretty amusing. Like, I actually enjoy that movie, unironically.
I haven't seen it myself.
It's
Um,
funny. It's just a little.
as far as, as far as direct-to-video sequels go, I actually will also write voice defense of Aladdin 3, The King of Thieves. Mostly
Aladdin
because,
2?
no,
So no,
Aladdin 3 and The King of Thieves.
Oh, Aladdin 3.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah, that
remember
was
that film.
yeah, mostly because of I think they do a great job with his relationship with his father, and John Rhys Davies does a great job voicing.
agreed.
Yeah.
That's the other best one. I can't stand most of the rest of them, especially the ones for Peter Pan and the Lady and the Tramp. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I heard I have not seen, but I have heard that Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time, is actually great.
I've
And
heard
I have heard
that
that often enough that's made me curious enough that I want to check it out one day.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
Because it's such a bizarre,
Don't
like, if you were to give me movies that did not need a sequel, I feel like Disney's Cinderella would be pretty high on the list.
Probably most of the classic Disney films would be high on the list.
yeah.
So to hear that the second Cinderella sequel is actually really good, kind of makes me scratch my head a little.
Well,
The thing sorry.
I always like to say, you can make a good story out of almost anything if you just take the time and the effort out of to do it.
The thing I like best about the second Cinderella sequel, which the sequel Cinderella before the third one, was the redemption of, I think it's Anastasia. Uh, third one. Anastasia actually finds true love in one of the stories in the second one, and they made it pretty plausible. Uh, French version, which is the one that most people in the English speaking world are familiar with. They're not familiar with the German or the Italian one, but the French one is more familiar. And at the end of the French one, the two stepsisters are found matches by Cinderella. So in that respect, I kind of like that. And I wonder if that was taking after the movie Ever After, because one of the sisters in that, with the stepsisters in that one, was actually a
Yeah, I
good
remember.
friend to, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually wondering whether that was connected. That's actually kind of a point that I like to make. A lot of people say, "Oh, Disney films are nothing like Grimm story tales." Well, most of the Disney films, the fairy tales, aren't based on Grimm; they're based on Charles Perrault.
Yeah, like so that's always kind of been a pet peeve of mine, actually, especially with the early Disney stuff. I think it is a fair criticism to level at the later ones. Like, for example, Disney's Little Mermaid, as fun as a lot of the music in that film is actually like almost antithetical to what Hans Christian Andersen was trying to do, to the point where like I have some serious problems with the plot of The Little Mermaid. But not feminist problems with the fact that like Hans Christian Andersen would have had an issue with The Little Mermaid. But anyway, going beyond that, like Cinderella is a really good example here. I have always heard from so many different places, people who I nominally agree with on most things, that Disney Cinderella is absolutely nothing like the original fairy tale, and by that they always mean Grimm's. So there are two problems with this. Number one is that Disney's fairy tale was actually a direct adaptation, almost one for one, of the Perrault story, as you pointed out. Like, it is such a straight up adaptation. If you were to read the Perrault story, it would be unmistakable that this is what Disney was adapting.
Yep.
Like, it is very, very clearly the same story. The second problem that I have with this is that Grimm's fairy tale isn't the first version of Cinderella, and it's not even clear. Like, there are many, many versions of Cinderella. I think like the last count I heard was thousands.
I don't think there is
Yeah.
the original
Right.
Cinderella. It's immemorial.
So to criticize Disney for not adapting, your preferred Cinderella is a little bit churlish when there are so many different versions of the story. Now, on the flip side of this is that what most people think that Beauty and the Beast is that sort of fairy tale, and they are wrong. Beauty and the Beast was a written and composed story with an author and a date, which is fascinating to me. I did not know that. But whoever came up with it, I gotta tip my cap to them. I believe it was a woman, in fact. And I have to tip my cap to her because she really nailed the timeless feeling of the fairy tale. I would never have guessed that it was composed by a writer.
Yeah. Honestly, the whole thing with the talking about the Grimm fairy tales and how violent they were is that my take on that is just like everybody says that so often. It's like I wonder who do you think you're surprising at this point?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, like I said, I do think that in
I'm
some
not
cases.
directing that at you. I'm just saying in general.
Oh yeah,
Whenever
yeah.
I hear people bring that up, it's like, yeah. You and 10,000 other people are saying that.
With that
Yeah.
said, I do think there are times that the criticism can fairly hit home. So, Little Mermaid again is a really good example of this because Little Mermaid, I think, almost gets to the opposite of what the Little Mermaid is trying to say. The original Little Mermaid story, first of all, as many Hans Christian Andersen stories are, is horribly tragic,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to the point of depressing. Hans Christian Andersen, it's so funny that he has this reputation as like this, upbeat, happy fairy tale children's writer, when in fact he had many incredibly depressing works. I mean, most famously, The Little Match Girl, which is just a horrifying read.
Yeah.
Which is just a horrifying read.
Have you ever? Are you familiar with the band Crusados?
I am not.
They actually do a song version of it, which is great. It's very. It's I mean, it's very sad, obviously, but it's a great song. Yeah, look up Magic Girl, Crusados. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, I would say Hans Christian Andersen's version of The Little Mermaid actually, in a sense, like, he was more aware of the problems with the story than the Disney company was. I was going to say Disney, but since we're discussing Disney the person, I need to be specific. Than Disney the company was. Like, the whole point of the story was, like, the unhealthiness of the Little Mermaid pining for something that she could never have, and how this ruins her life. And in Disney's version of The Little Mermaid, she gets the prince, and she gets to go on land, and it's a happy ending. And I don't think that that's what you were supposed to get out of that story.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's still a good film, but it's not a very good adaptation. Sure.
I think, yeah, it's in that realm of films where I would call it a highly entertaining film. Under the Sea is a great song. Part of Your World is, one of those perennial edition songs for actresses. It's a good song. Ursula is a very entertaining villain. Kiss the Girl is fun. Like, the whole thing, like, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There's no question. But I don't think it's very deep, and I think the original story was deeper.
Yeah, I have to revisit it just to see how I thought it had any depth, how much depth to it. I wouldn't doubt the story's probably deeper. The Disney company seems to have a problem with adapting Hans Christian Andersen stories and sticking to them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it gets much, much worse, of course, with Frozen. So, I will say this. I had remembered the ending of The Little Mermaid being horribly sad, but I am reading a summary of it on Infogalactic right now, and it says this. Prince and princess celebrate their new marriage aboard a wedding ship, and the Little Mermaid's heart breaks. She thinks of all that pain all that she has sacrificed, and the pain she's endured. She despairs, thinking of the death that awaits her. But before dawn, her sister rises out of the water and brings her a dagger that the sea witch has given them in exchange for their long, beautiful hair. If the Little Mermaid kills the prince and lets blood drip on her feet, she will become a mermaid once more. All her suffering will end, and she will live out her full life in the ocean with her family. However, the Little Mermaid cannot bring herself to kill the sleeping prince lying with his new wife, and she throws the dagger and herself off the ship into the water just as dawn breaks. Her body dissolves into foam, but instead of ceasing to exist, she feels the warm sun and discovers that she has turned into a luminous and ethereal earthbound spirit, a daughter of the air. As the Little Mermaid ascends into the atmosphere, she is greeted by other daughters, who tell her she has become like them because she strove with all her heart to obtain an immortal soul. Because of her selflessness, she is given the chance to earn her own soul by doing good deeds for mankind for 300 years, and will one day rise up into heaven. That is a happier ending than I remembered it being.
Yeah, that's a great ending.
Yeah,
That's
lovely,
actually
honestly.
that's actually the second ending. He started it off with her casting herself into the water and dissolving into foam, but either criticism came back and he didn't like it and he changed it, or he decided to change it anyway. Version I read, and that was what helped me. It's in the description for the video. Write my story, Scylla's Lair, which is available in Story Hack Magazine's issue 7. It's a take on. There have been so many adaptations, many of them of The Little Mermaid, where she gets the prince and everything, but they always skip over, and this is. It's not just the Disney company that skips it over. Everybody who adapts The Little Mermaid skips over the fact that part of what attracts her to the prince is mer people do not have immortal souls. As soon as they die, that's it, finito. They just disappear into oblivion forever. So part of the reason she wants to marry him is if she does, she imbibes some of his soul and will live forever in eternal happiness. So that's part of where I didn't drop that in my adaptation in Scylla's Lair. So if you want to see a different version of The Little Mermaid, check it out.
Yeah, because I'm reading like critical analysis, and there are some people who say they think that the theme is tacked on, but just from my own storytelling, instincts, without even reading the story, just reading a summary of it, I actually think that ending is wonderful. Like, that's a lovely story.
Oh yeah, I agree.
And I'm reading it, I go, other critics have argued that the ending is not tacked on, but a natural part of the story structure as a religious narrative. Literally, like, again, this is just me going off of my instincts as a storyteller. I would tend to agree with that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that sounds like the story was going that way. And I think that if it ended with the Little Mermaid's death, it would be much less satisfying than it is. Because it doesn't seem fair, and it doesn't also seem... There seems to be a way in which that does not reflect reality.
Yeah, I mean, her just dying kind of feels like almost pointless. Like,
Right. Like,
saying,
I kind of love the way that he does it, that she's given this choice. She falls in love with the prince. She
Mhm.
could, she has this choice now where all of her troubles will go away if she just takes the easy way out. And not only is it the easy way out, it's a moral choice in that she hates this woman. Like, she has every reason to want to kill this woman,
Yeah.
and there's no negative consequence for her at this point, right? She
Yeah.
has no reason to believe that not killing her will do anything, but she just can't bring herself to do it because she's not an evil person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, it's really, honestly, like, I actually am impressed, and it has been years since I read the story, as you could tell, because I got the ending wrong.
Yeah.
So if
Just the
yeah.
description of it is really impressive. Yeah, I'm impressed too, just from that.
So it's almost, I now feel even more robbed than I previously did at Disney's version.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like the Disney, the contemporary Disney, then contemporary Disney studio would never do an ending like that. I don't know, Walt might have.
Yeah, I could see Walt in one of his more ambitious moods
Yeah. I know
attempting something like
he
that.
probably discussed doing Little Mermaid, but never got around to it. That's kind of one of the things, people like to talk about Disneyfication and how always a happy ending and so forth. But there's a lot of harsh stuff in early Disney films, like obviously Yeller and Treasure Island, Jim, and the whole kind of complex relationship with Long John Silver and
Yes.
the League Under the Sea. Nemo dies at the end, and
Yeah, and I got off topic for a moment there, but I think I would say, when I was talking about the second, running theme I saw was civilization over barbarism.
Mhm.
And you get a sense where, like, Walt Disney has a very deep love for, I don't know, just society, right?
yeah,
How it should be.
for civilization, sort of the
And you could see in a film like in 20,000 Leagues and in Treasure Island, you could see that Disney definitely sees the appeal of barbarism, even in the Jungle Book to a lesser degree,
Mhm.
but never to the point where society isn't worth it.
Yeah. Are you gonna say something, Caroline?
Uh, just that if you've never seen the movie Saving Mr. Banks with, um, can't remember the actress's
Tom
name.
Hanks.
It's
Tom
the
Hanks.
actress name.
Oh,
Oh,
Emma Thompson.
Emma Thompson,
yeah, Emma Thompson. Emma Thompson. That's right. She played P.L. Travers, and oh, I'll think of his name in a minute. He's
Tom
Tom Hanks.
Hanks.
That's it. I had to remember his name. He plays Disney, and there's a very powerful line. It's an astounding movie. How historically accurate it is, but it's as a movie itself, it is very good. The astounding line toward the end, he talks to P.L. Travers, and he says, "That's what storytellers do. We bring order to the world, just for a little while." And the whole point is that he starts off saying the world is chaotic, it's hard, it's harsh. You loved your father because Mr. Banks in the book is based off of her father. I don't know if that's what it's like in real life, but he's based off of her father, and that's why she's so protective of Mary Poppins and Mr. Banks. It's her way of putting order to the world and her childhood. So she doesn't want it turned into something where it's just silly cartoons and all the rest of it. And Disney actually goes to meet her because she gets up in a huff and she leaves. Um, so Tom Hanks, as Disney, goes to meet her, and he explains about his own rough childhood, and that he explains that he loved his father too, but that every morning when he would do his newspaper run, his mother would remind him, "Now you've got to be out there and be on time, or your father's going to take that belt off."
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "I love my father, but I wish I hadn't had to hear that every morning." So, and that ties in with the traditional family is important and civilization over barbarism. Walt understood that in a way that a lot of people these days don't, because people appeal to barbarism over civilization, and you don't need the traditional family. Whereas it wasn't exactly as ideal as you wish, because and even if it's not as ideal as you wish, you can find a way to understand it and respect it and even love it, even if it wasn't what you wanted, through the ideal of storytelling.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen The Saving Mr. Banks, please watch it. It is a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, Saving Mr. Banks, in terms of like, the real story, quote unquote, because you mentioned like, yeah, as a movie it's great, but here is the difference with the real story. P.L. Travers was in some ways worse and in some ways better than the movie portrays her. She's better in the sense that her standing up to Walt Disney actually, and this is, by the way, we talked about, I admire Walt Disney. This is the negative, but he does have a dark side. This is the dark side. That P.L. Travers stood up to Walt Disney for as long as she did actually made her kind of a folk hero among like the children's, author scene at the time. The fact that she refused to compromise on her vision and Disney basically had to strong arm or force through all of its changes, made P.L. Travers like a minor celebrity in the literary world because nobody stood up to Walt Disney, and she did. Uh, where it's lesser is that P.L. Travers was a horrid person. Like, she was not just in the movie makes her an unpleasant person. She infamously she adopted a child who was one of a pair of twins and did not adopt the other twin. And I believe for years she tried to hide it, though I need to double check that. Uh, which is, I think pretty revolting to most people's modern sensibilities. Certainly is to mine. She also infamously hated Mary Poppins. Uh, and she did, although she eventually does admit that it's a fine movie, just not a particularly good adaptation of her work, which
Yeah.
is why she was so opposed to it. And in that sense, I believe she is probably correct I haven't read Mary Poppins, but my understanding of the book is that Disney's movie has very little to do with it.
Yeah, I think it's probably true. Um, well, my take on the film is that I like It's a good movie. I mostly like it because of Tom Hanks' Disney. I think that's just a smart bit of casting. Um, my my own favorite bit in that is when they're first talking and she says, "I'm not gonna let you turn her into one of your silly cartoons." And Disney is it's a great known acting by Tom Hanks. You can see that line that really hurts Disney and kind of hits him hard, and he kind of has to take a minute to compose himself because he, cares a lot about his work, and having her dismiss it like that to his face is, you know, and it upsets him a lot. You can tell. Um,
Mhm.
but um, yeah, going back to the whole idea of Disney and civilization, this that he was he was a futurist. He believed very much in technology and things getting better.
Oh yeah, that was the whole point of Epcot and the City of
Oh
Celebration,
yeah,
which is still around.
yeah. Towards the end of his life, his plan was he wanted to kind of move into like city planning and that kind of thing. That was what Epcot and all that was all was intended to be all about. And he,
Yeah, sadly, I think that Disney would have been extremely upset with the direction that Epcot went. He would have been very disappointed in
oh
it.
yeah, oh yeah,
I think he would have been happy with Disney World as a whole, but Epcot would have greatly disappointed him.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, like he was dying on his hospital bed. He was still describing how he wanted the city to be and like all the little, all the details, all the things, ways it would work, all the ways people would be able to, all the conveniences, all the ways you could use technology to make it better. Um, so yeah, he was very much a I want to say like the classic American of the early mid 20th century. He really was excited about the way that his country was going and the way the world was going, and eager to see that kind of expanding and growing outward and getting better all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, the modern state of the Disney parks is another sad story. I went to Walt Disney World with family in 2018 and had a wonderful time. Uh, However, my understanding is that the year that I went was like the last year that the Disney parks were at all run competently. Like ever since COVID, there was just a massive there was a twofold problem. Number one was that nobody wanted to work there anymore, and it's the same jobs crisis as anywhere else, where like they just could not hire people. And the second problem is that the Imagineers are now running out of ideas.
Yeah,
Uh, it is so. I've heard that they eliminated Fast Pass, which strikes me as such a phenomenally bad idea. I struggle to comprehend why they would have even considered it, let alone gone through with it. Uh, like you can't even navigate that park without Fast Pass. Why would you get rid of it? Uh, and I've heard that the new rides are all badly, badly lacking in creativity nowadays.
yeah.
Uh,
It
and
was,
I've just heard generally it's a very badly run park in to these days.
it seems like Disney in general these days just has no imagination whatever.
Right. So you get, their biggest hit in a while is Encanto, and they hire Lin-Manuel Miranda to do all of it. Lin-Manuel Miranda, I have serious issues with him and his philosophy, but he is a genius.
Yeah, he's a legitimately good writer and composer.
Yes. So, like Disney still has the money that they could buy the talent,
Hmm.
but in shop they just don't have anything like they're so soulless.
I mean,
There
that's
was the famous leaked interview with that Daily Wire leaked
uh,
of Disney executives just talking about the various ways they could push, the gay agenda in their films. Like it's
yeah,
really, really disturbing stuff to listen
yeah,
to.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of the shocking. I mean, not the shocking thing. What you just said is the shocking thing. It's the fact that they have all this money. They have an infinite amount of money. You know, effectively, and they hire mostly completely talentless people to write their films, make their films. I mean, at least as far as writing goes. Like this was something I talked about with the Star Wars trilogy. It's like you they revealed, yeah, we didn't actually have any kind of plan for this. Like you just bought the most valuable IP in the world, and for $4 billion, and you didn't even bother to sit down and make an outline for this thing.
Well, no, they had a plan from the beginning, which was to promote their agendas. Like the profit is the propagation of their religion. They
Well,
are
yeah,
our enemies. Like that's the thing for this stuff. Like they
yeah,
want us destroyed. They want us to be removed from all the things that we find good and wholesome and beautiful and true and all that good stuff, and their behaviors as vandals is completely in keeping with what's going on internal structures. Like they have a core. These people were willing to put in the hard work to rise in the ranks of these organizations, and they took them over. It's one of those things where it's like, blah blah blah. Do right wingers make art? Yes, but right wingers tend to not be able to do the same sort of subversive planning that comes very naturally to lefty foxes, who are smarter and all that jazz than what we can handle. I know I'm not smart enough to infiltrate a group and hide my affiliations, partially because people just take one look at me and they go, "You're right wing, aren't you?" Yes.
not not dishonest enough to do that.
Right.
But
Right.
Agreed.
dishonesty is an advantage in these things.
Yep. And that's the thing with it is that they played the game and won it because they played to win, not played to follow the rules, and then win by following the rules. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of how things are going to have to be in the future. Ultimately, there are people who are explicitly our enemies. A lot of them work for Disney. If you have a Disney subscription and you're paying money to the beast, you are not an enemy in the same way that some sort of stormtrooper SJW is, but you're giving them war material to use against you and your children and everything else like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Although
it.
anyone's contribution is so minuscule that it kind of almost doesn't make a difference. But I
Doesn't.
agree.
Yeah.
Try not to give money to them if you can help it.
Yep. And it's like, that sort of thing. Well, it's too small. Yeah, I know. I know, dude. It's like $7, and then like they barely get three of your dollars because it has to go to the licensing for the other stuff that they bought. Sure, yeah, and the server costs and all that jazz. But like, it's still the same thing. It's like those people who are on trial in Russia right now because they supported the war in Ukraine and were dumb enough to be mercenaries in Ukraine. They are enemy combatants. In international court of law, they've done things that allow Putin to try them for the death penalty. Like it, and that's sort of the explicit political. The implicit political is that anyone who's a member of SWIFWA is absolutely suspect in their loyalty to the cause of the good, the beautiful, and the true, the cause of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
If it's like I saw a priest eating at a barbecue restaurant I went to. Usually I'm very polite to priests and pastors and all that jazz, but then I realized I didn't recognize his smock, and I decided not to say anything because I might greet a Jesuit. Like it's one of those things. Like the enemies are all over the place. They look friendly, they look like nice people, they have families, but they still hate what we are, or they are willing to subvert what we are. Either for good boy brownie points or for, um, whatever nightmare they go on in their bedrooms at night. Like it just keeps going. Disney, and I'm kind of gonna wrap us up because we're at 2 hours, and I am absolutely exhausted. Even though I'm using a voice of power, speaking truth as the voice from Arcturus whispers into my ears, because the meds have worn off. Is that whatever Disney is producing now, they hate us. They hate our families. They hate our civilization. And I'm not even talking about Christian civilization. I'm talking about all civilizations that promote anything good and wholesome. They would prefer your children raped than your children preserved from all harms and raised to be good people. And it just keeps going like that. To see how they treated, Marion Zimmer Bradley and Walter Breen, who were proven pedophiles, and all these other people. Like it doesn't end, and it keeps going and going and going. We haven't even really gotten out of the aughts, 2000 aughts, in our discussion today. So there will have to be a part 3 at your discretion, but perhaps not until sometime after August, sir. It just keeps going. Like they took Star Wars, even though they were like, yeah, we're gonna make a lot of money. All the people who would have actually done the work of making the movies hated it. J.J. Abrams, maybe at best, was indifferent to the product he was going to make. What's his name? Fatface, Rian Johnson, was going to destroy it. It's the same with Chuck Wendig. He doesn't actually care about any of that. He just wants to get paid. Worse than that, he wants to be superior because he's a little gamma so and so.
It's a cultural strategic point to them.
Yep. And it's kind of like why I don't say anything bad against our own. It's because, even though, I do have problems sometimes, the reason is because they don't until it's time to hit them with a Me Too movement. They'll even protect them in the most horrible things you can imagine. And it keeps going and going. But, like I said in the last stream, FBI is starting to comment that pretty much every child predation ring has had Disney employees in it. There's been plenty of articles that's like, I felt like my kids were stalked at Disneyland, or my kids were literally stalked at Disneyland, or I foiled a kid's kidnapping at Disney. It goes deeper and deeper. And unfortunately, whatever Walt Disney had, it's gone. The spark is gone. Maybe you can justify before God buying the old movies, basically Princess and the Frog and before, maybe Tangled. I can't remember where that is in the timeline. But ultimately, I don't see how you can support Pixar or Disney or any of these other ones, and remain upright before God. Um, you know, there's that song that was put out, we're coming for your children. Oh, sorry, it was a joke. No, it wasn't, and that's what it comes down to. I hope that everyone listening, we do have some listeners here today, will support the Superversive movement. We are coming out with new products soon, and it's going to be big. It's going to be great. We've got some real great contenders out there coming in from the future to bring the greatness of storytelling to now. We've got things that you will never see outside of the most wholesome times, and of course it'll have all the violence and action and drama that you crave, but none of the pornography. Thank God. Thank you, David Breitenbeck. Do you have any final words for us?
I don't know at the moment. Kind of got into, I don't know, areas that are not. I don't have much to say on it except what you said. So yeah, nothing at the moment. Thanks you for having us on again.
Yep. Do check out David Breitenbeck's book, which is in the description below. Caroline, do you have any final words for us?
Shout out to The Parent Trap, the original one from 1961. That was a very good movie.
It was. Anthony, how about you? Anthony.
Did you lose Anthony?
I don't know. Maybe?
Okay.
Okay. Well, we're skipping Anthony. Uh, I've made my great speech. I'm operating on 2 hours of sleep, so I'm going to sleep and perchance to dream. Thank you all for joining us. Do come in next week. I can't remember whether it's this week or next week that we're doing either a Pinkerton's Ghost stream or a Reformation Council of Trent. I think it's the Council of Trent. And we'll go from there. Have a good one.
Take care.